You may have heard some of the rules of thumb that you're supposed to follow to retire successfully. They're usually stated so confidently that it sounds like you should just accept them as fact. But should you really rely on them for financial guidance? In this episode, we're going to talk about what to do to prevent the popular retirement rules of thumb from leading you down the wrong path.
It's easy to get lost on the way to retirement. Things like taxes, improper planning, and excessive market risk can all lead you astray from your goal of a successful and happy retirement. That's where Liz Whittaberry comes in. She's a holistic financial advisor and the founder of Best Path Advisors, and she can help guide you to a better financial path. This is Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry.
Welcome into another edition of the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Liz and I here on Retire on Your Best Path. And we're going to talk about those popular rules of thumb because they're everywhere in all facets of life, Liz, but certainly in the financial world, no shortage of these. So we'll kind of run through them and, just kind of see how you think, what you think about them. And I think they're kind of good for like getting you in a kind of a mindset, but I don't know how much, effort you want to go after that. So we'll talk about that a little bit.
And getting you to think.
Yeah,
They should be a starting point.
Yeah, like a little back of the napkin kind of thing. Some, kind of quick, some quick math for stuff. But you always want to see how it's specifically going to break things down when you get into the nitty gritty. So let's dive in. Let's start with a couple. We'll do some that people probably heard and maybe a few that people haven't heard. We'll start with one that maybe you haven't heard, the rule of 72. What is that one?
If you take the number 72 divided by the interest rate, you're going to know how fast your money will double, which is an interesting number to consider.
Okay.
But beyond that, you need to think about, well, how's it invested? Am I going to actually earn that rate of return or that growth over this whole period of time? And what is the risk for taking that on? If you want to double it in 2 years, you need to earn 34%. If you want to double in 1 year, you need to earn 72% versus 10 years, 7.2%. So there's a lot of difference in the risk, and that really has to play into how you're going to be investing.
So you take that money, you divide it by the interest rate, and then that tells you how fast your money will double, huh?
Yes.
It's interesting. Yeah, okay. Is it accurate? Is it something that you think works for people? Is it, I guess that's more of a math problem than a rule of thumb, though, huh?
Right. And again, for it to work for people, they have to understand the risk that's going to be involved. Because if you're going to try to double money in 1 or 2 years, you're going to have to take a whole lot more risk of volatility in order to do that. You're not going to get a CD that's going to pay you 72% in a year.
Right.
Yeah. Or 34% over 2 years. You're going to think about the risks that you're going to be taking over the time period and make sure that you're getting the investment lining up. But it does help you, maybe think about taking a little bit bigger risk and get a bigger rate of return with some of that money. Because I do come across people that, they really just want to keep it in the very safest.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
That feels safe,
yeah.
But then the money doesn't grow nearly as fast.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. All right. Well, so that's kind of like an investing for retirement rule, maybe a spending for retirement rule. We'll stick with the 70s here, 75% rule. I feel like this one is definitely outdated, but what is it and what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this was maybe true decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what this rule says is that when you're thinking about how much you're going to spend in retirement, you can plan that you'll need about 75% of the money that you earn while working. And that's because, you're saving into your 401k or other savings plans. You've got work lunches. You've got maybe some work travel. You've got a daily commute, so more wear and tear on the car, and all of these things that add up. The problem, though, is these days retirees are so much more active. And so once you retire, all of my clients retire into doing things like new hobbies, new travel, fixing up their house that they haven't fixed up in a while, or even some higher healthcare costs. And so there's things that replace the things that retirees, they're reducing their income on one side, their expenses on one side, but then they're increasing them on the other side with new things. And so I think you could very well end up spending the same amount of money. I just had a client reach out to me that they're retiring and said, it looks like it's going to be kind of tight. Can we add another 15 or 20,000 a year in here?
Mm-hmm.
And so I ran the numbers and they can do it because they've got some cushion, but you don't want to just go based on, all I'll need is 75%. No, that may not be true.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, I agree. I think maybe years ago that was the case, but A, just inflation and everything being more expensive. B, we're much more active, than we were 20 years ago, and activities
That's
just
the biggie.
cost money. Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
I don't think if you plan on that, I think you could set yourself up for a little failure versus,
Right.
spending basically what you're spending now, right? Kind of going into retirement, not thinking about taking a step backwards.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. How much to save for retirement would be the rule of 10. Is this the 10 times thing? Is that what that is?
Yes, it is. Have 10 times your salary saved for retirement by age 67.
Well, that seems impossible for some people when they hear that, right? They go, I don't know if I can do that.
Right. And yet, the way these numbers work, if you look at some research that was done by Fidelity, and they here's different points in time how much you should have saved as a multiple of your salary. And age 67 would be 10 times. If you're going to have an average lifestyle, you're going to have sort of the same lifestyle that you have before you retire. You're not going to have a higher spending because of even more travel or whatever it might be. You're going to start your Social Security at full retirement age, and you're going to aim to replace 45% of your income and live to age 90 and have a 90% confidence level of success. So your accounts are replacing 45% of your income. You're bringing in your Social Security. You're living to 93, not longer. And you've got this 90% confidence level of success. What people don't understand sometimes is what all goes into just the simple rule. And if you're going to live longer, you might need to have more saved. If you maybe aren't going to have the max Social Security, you might need to have a little bit more saved because you might need to fill in a little more of a gap there. If you have
sense.
more in tax deferred accounts instead of tax-free or taxable accounts, you might be losing more to income tax during retirement. And so you might have to have a little bit more saved. If you want to have an above average retirement lifestyle, and some people do, then again, you might need to have a little more saved. Fidelity says 12 times instead of 10 times if you want to have that above average. And then we don't know what inflation is going to do in the future. It could be higher than it has been in the past during the period of time that they were doing these tests. And so we've got to consider that as well. So you do want to think about how much you're going to have saved. And 10 times it could be the lower end for a lot of people.
No, that's a great point because it hits the ear, right?
Yes.
Kind of hard, right? So you're like, well, I make
Sounds
100.
like a lot.
Yeah, I make 100,000 a year. That's $1 million by
That's
the
$1
time I'm
million.
60, right? And so you go, I'm not going to get there. But you might.
Right.
I mean, you start looking at things, and sometimes when people start kind of getting into the numbers, they're like, oh, well, I'm a little closer than I thought, or whatever the case is. And especially, and it's all we often talking about, some of the dent that you can make in the catch-up contribution years, right? After 50, you can really kind of start shoring some of that stuff up too. So it's possible.
Once you're not paying as much for kids, that's what I found, then you can really start directing a whole lot more into those retirement accounts and begin to focus on that. And then as it begins to build up, then you see that it's growing faster than you thought. And that's where you can go back and look at that rule of 72. Okay, well, if I've got 10 years before I want to retire, kind of how do I need to invest this along with what I'm saving in order to get to where I need to be be at 10 times or 12 times my income at that point in time.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So you can definitely kind of tie some of these back in together when you're working through some of these rules of thumb. Okay, very cool. All right, we'll go with a classic one here that just probably about everybody's heard, and that's how much do you withdraw, right? The withdrawal rate, the 4% rule. We just did a show not long ago, I think, about the guy redoing his own numbers on that, right?
Yeah, we did, which is interesting. And that 4% rule that's been around since the 1990s, yes. And so it's been around for a long time based on numbers beginning back in the 60s because he was running 30-year retirements. Well, that's a good starting point. And that's what I tell people. It's a good starting point. It gives you, a rough idea of how much could you spend in retirement. Again, you got to go back to all those questions I just asked. Your situation, how long will you live? Are you retiring younger? Are you retiring older? What might inflation be over those years? How much are you going to lose to income taxes versus not? So there's a whole lot of other things that play into your actual number for yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
we've covered that in more than one podcast. But the thing that I don't like about this rule is it sounds so simple and it sounds so easy to follow. I just had a conversation with a couple that are going to retire, and they're retiring young, they're retiring in their late 50s. And she said, I looked at our stuff and they're invested very conservatively. And, with the 4% rule, we're going to be fine. And I said, well, the thing you need to understand is the 4% rule is based on being invested half in equities and half in fixed income type investments. And she said, oh, we're not really invested that way. And so you've got to know what is behind the numbers and how you line up with that. Because if you're going to be invested more conservatively, then 4% is going to be too high potentially for your portfolio.
Yeah. And that's where, again, we and I forget what episode it was. I'll have to look it up. We'll put a link to it in the show notes for folks if they want to go back and listen to that more in-depth episode on the 4%. But yeah, it's certainly interesting, the research on that. And, just what do you need? I mean, and every situation is going to change up. I mean, somebody with pensions may not need as much and somebody without pensions may need more, right? So
right. And if you're going to be trying to aim for 4%, then you need to think about how you're going to be invested to support that over time and go back to that research. Well, this is how you invest at 50-50, how that would look.
Well, and, again, a lot of these are back of the napkin, right? So some of these are pretty, pretty spot on, as we talked about. 4% rule, I could see somebody quickly just saying, maybe having dinner and saying, we've got $1 million in, this account. If we pull out 4%, which is $40,000 a year, that should shore up our shortfall, blah, blah, blah. But again, you want to run those projections and those numbers to make sure that, you're actually getting the correct amount together versus just back of the napkin. And the same thing with this next one, which I think is a good kind of starting conversation piece, but you want to dive in specifically when you're dealing with risk. And it's the rule of 100, Liz. What is that and what's your thoughts?
Yeah, the rule of 100, that's around for a very long time. And it says, well, you take 100 minus your age, and that'll tell you how much risk you should have, which basically we're thinking how much should be invested in equities.
Sure. You're 70.
And
you think, okay, 30% at risk, right?
Right.
Right.
Well, that rule was created when people didn't live as long as they do today. There's a lot of difference in, if you're trying to, again, earn a 4%, take 4% withdrawal and you're 70 and you're going to maybe live into your 90s and yet you only have 30% invested in equities, that may not be enough to support that whole scenario playing out properly. So you've got to come back and look at your own situation. If you're putting only 30% in equities, then what are the other kind of risks that you're taking? You may not keep up with inflation. You have inflation risk. You have longevity risk. You have all of these other risks that you've got to think about and balance them out. And so just saying 100 minus my age is how much to have in equities. Well, pretty soon you don't have any in equities and you've got everything else moved to very slow or low growth. To do that, you need to be able to take less than 4% and support your lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. And, somebody might hear that and say, okay, I'm 70, rule of 100, 30% at risk. That doesn't make me feel very good. I want less risk than that, I want more than that. Right.
Yeah. And again, you've got to know how your plan runs to know if it will support. I say take only the risk that you need to take, but you also shouldn't take less than the risk that you need to take. You want to make sure that you are staying on track to meet all your goals over your whole retirement lifetime.
Yeah. There you go. All right, well, let's do the last one here. The rule of 5. This seems like this one may have been blown out of the water over the last 12 or 13 years. But what is the rule of 5?
It says that on average, we experience a bear market every 5 years. And that doesn't tell us when they're going to happen. It comes every 5 years. No, it's an average. And averages can have a much bigger number and a much lower number in that.
Right. We went 12 years since 2009 or something before we had any kind of prolonged downturn, or 13 years, something like that. So, yeah. Right.
And so that pulled the average up, but then we might have something that happens very close together that pulls that average down.
Like the lost decade, right? Yeah. So the 2000 to 2010. So, I mean, I guess maybe if you average it out, I guess that's a good point, but it feels like it feels a little dated. So.
Right. And on the other side, though, people say to me all the time, we're so high now. it has to drop soon.
Sure. Yeah.
And then that creates this fear of, I don't want to be invested. I want to wait. It's going to drop. Well, people end up setting out of the market and losing a lot of growth by approaching it that way. And that's why I go back to put together a bucket plan so that you can invest the amount that needs to be invested to get that growth without worrying about how it's going to impact your cash flow in the meantime.
Well, so in general, rules of thumb, thoughts, takeaways?
Again, I think they're a good starting point.
Okay.
But you look at them, you kind of compare your situation to them, and then put your plan together and know what you need to do to be on your best path.
Great conversation starters, but yeah, definitely want to dive into the specifics and the nitty gritty, and that's where Liz can help you. So reach out to her at bestpathadvisors.com. That's bestpathadvisors.com. Before you take any action, you should always check with a qualified professional so you see how it's going to affect your specific situation, and Liz, of course, is here to help. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify or whatever audio podcasting platform app you like. You can also check out her YouTube channel as well. Lots of good stuff at her website on the Good Stuff tab there. So bestpathadvisors.com. Again, bestpathadvisors.com. Liz, thanks for hanging out, breaking it down as always. Appreciate your time. And folks, we'll see you next time here on Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whitberry.
The preceding program is sponsored by Best Path Advisors, which is solely responsible for its content. Securities offered through J.W. Cole Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through J.W. Cole Advisors. Best Path Advisors, J.W. Cole Financial, and J.W. Cole Advisors are unaffiliated entities. The opinions expressed by Liz Whitberry should not be construed as specific tax, legal, or investment advice, nor as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Neither J.W. Cole Financial nor its representatives provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. Persons who provide such advice do so in a capacity other than as a registered representative of J.W. Cole. Investing is subject to risks, including the loss of principal. Due to volatility within the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable, however, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed.